The morning looked ordinary, sunlight pouring through spotless windows, the smell of toast and coffee in the air. But in one quiet kitchen, everything changed in a heartbeat. A little girl cried out, "Mom, please don't," as a storm of anger spilled over her small world. And just when hope seemed lost, the sound of a door opening froze time itself. Because sometimes, the truth that enters a home can change it forever. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The old house on Maplewood Lane had grown used to silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind that came after laughter or song. It was the sort of silence that settled when words were too heavy to say. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, marking time that seemed to belong to someone else. Ethan Caldwell stood by the tall window, staring out at the fading autumn light. The lake beyond the trees mirrored the dull gold of the sky, still and untouched, as if afraid to disturb its own reflection. He hadn't spoken in hours. He didn't need to. The house already knew the rhythm of his quiet. Behind him, footsteps shuffled across the hardwood floor. Martha, gray-haired and kind-eyed, appeared in the doorway with a folded dish towel in her hands. "Dinner's ready, sir. Miss Lila's already eaten. Mrs. Caldwell said she'll dine later." Ethan didn't move at first. The name lingered in the air like dust in a sunbeam. Mrs. Caldwell. Martha still called her that, out of habit, though even Ethan sometimes wondered if the name ever truly fit. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Martha." She hesitated. "Will you be joining them?" He looked down at the half-empty glass of bourbon on the side table. "Not tonight." Martha sighed, but there was no judgment in it. "You can't live on memories and whiskey forever, Mr. Caldwell." "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but they seem to live just fine on me." She left him to his ghosts. Outside, the wind began to stir, brushing against the maple leaves that hadn't yet fallen. The sound was soft, almost like breathing. From the hallway came the faint clatter of a child's laughter. Lila, his daughter, 8 years old, a wild tangle of curls and questions. Her laughter was the only sound that made this house feel human again. He turned as she appeared in the doorway, her sketchbook tucked under one arm, a smear of paint across her cheek. "Daddy, look! I drew the lake again." He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The paper showed a rough sketch of their house and the lantern by the dock glowing in the dusk. The strokes were messy, full of life. "It's beautiful," he said. "You made the light brighter this time." "Because it's always on," she said proudly. "Even when it rains." He smiled faintly. "That's true." Lila's eyes softened. "Are you sad again?" Ethan hesitated. "Just tired." "And of what?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Of forgetting what happy feels like." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense, then handed him a small folded note. "Mom said to give you this." He opened it carefully. Vanessa's handwriting, elegant, controlled, read, "Dinner at 8. We should talk." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years. He folded the paper once more, pressing it between his fingers as though it might dissolve. "Daddy," Lila whispered, "are you mad at Mom again?" He looked at her, at the honesty in her small face, and shook his head. "No, sweetheart, I'm just not sure what to say anymore." She nodded solemnly. "Then maybe you can just listen." He smiled faintly at that out of the mouths of children. "Maybe you're right." As she ran off toward her room, the house fell silent again. But it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This one felt softer, almost expectant, like the brief pause before a confession. Ethan turned back to the window. The sky had dimmed to a smoky violet, the first stars blinking awake above the lake. Somewhere out there, beyond the reflection of the trees, a lantern flickered on the dock. He had left it burning weeks ago and never found the heart to extinguish it. He used to think it was for Anna, the first love, the wife he had lost too soon. But lately, he wasn't sure. Maybe the light wasn't for the dead at all. Maybe it was for the living, the ones still trying to find their way back. He whispered to the quiet room, "I'll listen, Lila. I promise." Outside, the lantern's flame wavered once, then steadied, casting a golden line across the water, thin, fragile, but unbroken. Ethan woke on the couch just before dawn, the embers in the fireplace cold and gray. A faint tapping came from the roof, rain beginning again. gentle this time, like a memory returning. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and saw that Lila's drawing from yesterday still lay on the table. 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sundae. At the bottom, in her crooked handwriting, she had written, "Me and Mommy and Daddy." Ethan traced the word Mommy with his finger and sighed. He made his way to the kitchen. The coffee pot clicked to life, filling the air with warmth. Outside, fog hung low across the lake. For a moment, he could almost believe the world was soft again. Footsteps behind him broke the thought. Vanessa entered, her robe cinched perfectly at the waist, her expression already composed. "You were up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep. Work again?" "No," he said, turning toward her. "Just thinking." She poured herself coffee, her movements precise. "You think too much, Ethan. That's always been your problem." He smiled faintly. "And yours is pretending you never do." She gave a short laugh but didn't meet his eyes. "You should get ready. Lila's school meeting is this afternoon." "I remember." As she turned to leave, he said quietly, "Vanessa, was everything all right last night?" She froze for a fraction of a second. "Of course. Why?" "I thought I heard her crying." "You must have imagined it." She sipped her coffee. "You worry too much." Then she was gone, her perfume trailing behind her like smoke. Ethan stood there, the unease returning stronger than before. He looked toward the staircase, empty, still, quiet, but he could almost hear Anna's voice again, whispering from memory, "Listen when something feels wrong." Outside, the first sunlight broke through the clouds, catching the lake in gold. He turned off the coffee pot, straightened his tie, and walked toward the stairs. Somewhere deep down, he already knew that this was the beginning of the end, and that sometimes peace breaks not with thunder, but with silence. The morning light was soft, sliding across the lake like silk. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and still. Ethan stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, the smell of wet pine heavy around him. It should have been peaceful, but the house behind him felt too quiet. He had always thought silence meant safety. Lately, it only reminded him how much of his life had become habit meals, eaten alone, conversations that stopped before they began, a daughter who whispered instead of laughed. Inside, the grandfather clock struck 7. Martha was already at the stove, humming softly as she flipped pancakes. "Good morning, sir," she said with a smile. "Miss Lila's up early. She's drawing again." Ethan smiled faintly. "She takes after her mother." Martha's hands paused on the spatula. "Anna?" He nodded. "Yeah, she could spend hours sketching sunsets on napkins." From the dining room came Lila's small voice, singing under her breath. Ethan turned the corner and saw her sitting at the table, bare feet swinging, a yellow crayon in her hand. "Morning, sweetheart." "Morning, Daddy." He kissed the top of her head. "You slept okay?" "Uh-huh." She hesitated. "Mom got mad last night." Ethan knelt beside her. "What happened?" "I spilled my juice. She said I'm careless." He forced a smile. "Accidents happen. You didn't do anything wrong." Lila nodded, but kept coloring. Her drawing showed 3 people standing by a lake, the same one from yesterday's picture, but this time, one of the figures was missing its face. He wanted to ask, but the sound of heels on the tile stopped him. Vanessa entered, immaculate as always, silk blouse tucked neatly into tailored trousers. Her tone was brisk. "You'll be late, Ethan." He stood. "It's Saturday." She blinked. "Oh, right." Then softer. "I didn't sleep much." "Neither did I." They looked at each other for a long moment before she turned to Lila. "Finish breakfast, darling. Don't make a mess." The air in the room felt colder after she left. Lila looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, do you miss Mommy Anna?" Ethan swallowed. "Every day." "Me too." She glanced toward the staircase. "But I don't tell Mom." "Why not?" "Because she doesn't like that name." He reached out and touched her hand. "Then you can tell me, okay?" She nodded, a small, brave smile forming. Later that morning, Ethan walked the grounds of the estate, the dew still heavy on the grass. From the upper window, he could see Vanessa pacing her room, phone pressed to her ear. Even from below, her gestures looked sharp, impatient. He turned away, feeling that old ache of distance, the kind that no success or money could bridge. When he came back inside, the house was still. Then, suddenly, a sharp sound split the quiet. A cry, high, and frightened. "Mom, please stop." Ethan froze. The mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. He was already running, his pulse roaring in his ears as he climbed the stairs, 2 at a time. The hallway seemed longer than it should. He reached the door and pushed it open. Lila stood by the wall, tears streaking her cheeks. Vanessa towered over her, a ruler in hand, her expression cold and controlled. "Vanessa," Ethan's voice shook. "What are you doing? She needs discipline. She's a child." He moved between them, shielding Lila. The ruler slipped from Vanessa's hand and hit the floor with a dull sound. For a moment, no one spoke. Lila clung to his leg, trembling. Ethan turned to Vanessa. "This ends now." Her face tightened. "If you keep undermining me, you'll lose her respect." "I'm not worried about respect," he said. "I'm worried about her fear." Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came. Then she turned sharply and left the room. Ethan lifted Lila into his arms. She buried her face against his shoulder. "It's okay, baby," he murmured. "You're safe. Daddy's here." Martha appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Sir, this isn't the first time." Ethan met her gaze and knew she was right. He carried his daughter downstairs, every step echoing like a promise. Outside, the wind stirred across the lake again, not a storm, not yet, but enough to remind him that peace, once broken, never comes back quietly. The rain never came that afternoon, but the clouds stayed heavy over the lake, turning the water gray. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the open file on his computer, the numbers swimming on the screen. He hadn't gone to the office. He couldn't. Every sound in the house made him tense, the closing of a door, the creak of a floorboard, Lila's small voice humming somewhere upstairs. He had spent the morning keeping things normal for her. Pancakes, cartoons, a promise that everything was fine, but the words tasted false even as he said them. When the phone rang, he almost didn't answer. "Ethan Caldwell," he said. "Still pretending to work on weekends?" The voice on the other end carried a smile he hadn't heard in years. Derek, his younger brother. Ethan leaned back. "You picked a good day to call. I heard there's trouble," Derek said lightly. "The kind of trouble that makes people talk." Ethan's hand tightened on the receiver. "How do you know that? Small town? Big mouths? You can't hide everything, big brother. Not even from me." The line crackled with static. For a second, Ethan could hear wind, maybe a car engine. "What do you want, Derek?" "Nothing. Just checking in. We should talk soon. There are things you ought to know." Then the line went dead. Ethan sat there, staring at the phone. The last time they'd spoken had been at their father's funeral, 5 years ago. Derek had stormed out before the will was read. They had built the company together. Once, then greed, pride, and silence did the rest. He rubbed his temples. When he looked up, he saw Lila standing in the doorway. "Daddy, are you mad?" He forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Just thinking again." She nodded, as if she understood more than she should. "You always think too much," she said, echoing Vanessa's words from that morning. He crossed the room and lifted her into his lap. "Maybe I do, but thinking helps fix things." She tilted her head. "Can it fix Mom?" Ethan hesitated. "Maybe not fix, but maybe understand." The front door opened downstairs, Martha letting in a visitor. Moments later, a familiar voice called out, warm but steady. "Ethan?" Thomas Avery stepped into the study, a gray overcoat draped over his arm, rain spots on his shoes. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Close enough," Ethan replied. "Coffee? Only if it's strong." They sat across from each other, steam curling between them. Thomas had been the family's attorney since before Ethan could drive. He had watched the brothers grow, watched them fight, and had never taken sides, at least not aloud. "So," Thomas said, "tell me what's happening." Ethan told him everything, Vanessa's temper, the bruises, Derek's call. He even played the short message he had found on the answering machine. Vanessa's voice, sharp and hurried, saying, "He's starting to ask questions. We need to move fast." Thomas listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, the old lawyer leaned back, tapping a finger on his cup. "You still keep your father's old files in the study?" "Yes. Go through them. Look for anything tied to Derek contracts, letters, transfers. If he's involved, there will be traces." Ethan nodded. And if there's more, then we bring it to the sheriff. But first, keep this quiet, for Lila's sake. The afternoon light dimmed. Lila peeked in, holding her sketchbook. Can I show Mr. Avery my drawing? Thomas smiled. Of course. She opened the book to a new page. A picture of their house, the lake, the sun just peeking out from clouds. But in one corner, there was a small figure standing under a tree, drawn in gray pencil, faceless. Who's that? Ethan asked. Lila shrugged. A man I saw outside last night. He was watching the house. Thomas met Ethan's eyes over her head. Might be time to fix more than numbers, my friend. Outside. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the porch. The lake rippled once, as if something beneath had stirred. Ethan closed the curtains and whispered, mostly to himself, "It's starting." The rain had returned by morning, a slow drizzle that painted the windows silver. Ethan woke to the sound of it tapping softly against the roof, like a patient reminder that some things never really stop, they just learn to fall quieter. The house smelled of dust and old wood. Somewhere upstairs, a loose shutter creaked in the wind. He had meant to fix it weeks ago, but like so many things lately, it had slipped through his fingers. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stood in the kitchen doorway. Martha was already there, folding laundry on the counter, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. "Morning," she said without looking up. The attic door sticking again, probably the damp. Ethan took a slow sip. "I'll check it later." Martha nodded. "Mrs. Caldwell asked me to box up some of the old linens, said she wanted the space cleared." The name still carried a weight when spoken aloud. Martha had always called her Mrs. Caldwell, a habit of respect, not conviction even now. When the truth had started to surface, Ethan didn't correct her. Some habits were gentler left untouched. He set the mug down. "She asked you to go up there today?" "Yesterday, actually, before she left." He frowned. "Left? For the city. Said she needed some air." Martha paused, studying his face. "Something wrong, sir?" He didn't answer immediately. The memory of last night still pulsed behind his eyes, the argument, the slammed door. Vanessa's words like glass underfoot. "You think you know me, Ethan, but you never did." He exhaled slowly. "No, Martha. Nothing's wrong. Just ghosts. Maybe." She smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed cautious. "Well, you tell those ghosts they're not welcome unless they plan on helping with the laundry." That earned a quiet laugh from him, the kind that sounded rusty from disuse. "I'll let them know. When she left the room, he turned toward the hallway. The old staircase creaked under his feet, each step an echo of years he couldn't quite name. The air grew colder as he reached the attic door. It was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, and a thin ray of daylight spilled across the floorboards. Dust motes floated like slow snow in the light. Boxes lined the walls, some marked Anna's things, others labeled in Vanessa's careful handwriting. Summer clothes, silverware, letters. He knelt beside one labeled letters and opened it. Inside were dozens of envelopes, some addressed to him, some not at all. He recognized the slant of Vanessa's writing, and beneath it, an older envelope in another hand entirely. His father's. He froze, fingers brushing the faded ink. "To my son, if this ever finds you." The paper trembled as he unfolded it. The words inside were simple, almost painfully so. "Son, there will come a day when the truth feels heavier than love. Carry it anyway. It's the only way to know which one matters more." He read the line 3 times. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the lake. He didn't know how long he sat there before Martha's voice called from below. "Mr. Caldwell, there's someone at the door. Says he's from the sheriff's office." Ethan blinked, slipping the letter into his pocket. "Coming." When he reached the front hallway, Thomas was waiting hat in hand, uniform damp from the rain. "Morning," Thomas said. "I wouldn't have come unannounced, but I thought you'd want to see this yourself." He handed over a plastic evidence sleeve. Inside was a small gold locket, old but well kept. Ethan turned it over in his hands. On the back, engraved initials, V.M. He frowned. "Vanessa Moore." Thomas nodded slowly. "Not Caldwell. She never changed it. Not on her ID, not on any records. I figured you ought to know before the storm gets louder." Ethan looked past him toward the lake. The rain had begun to fall harder now, a gray curtain between him and the world outside. "I guess the truth has its own weather," he said quietly. Thomas studied him for a moment. "Sometimes it clears faster when you stop trying to stay dry." The words lingered long after the door closed. Ethan stood there, the locket cold in his hand, the initials cutting through him sharper than any confession could. He could hear Martha humming softly from the kitchen again, pretending not to notice the silence that had returned. But this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. He turned the locket once more, then slipped it into his pocket beside his father's letter. 2 truths, 2 ghosts, resting side by side. Outside, lightning flared over the lake, and for a brief blinding second, everything, the house, the trees, his reflection in the window, was lit with the same light. The rain eased into a whisper by late afternoon, the kind that didn't fall so much as drift. The light outside had turned to pewter, and the lake wore the same dull sheen as an old mirror. Ethan stood by the window, watching the ripples fade. The locket felt heavy in his palm, not for its weight, but for what it carried. V.M. The initials burned in his thoughts. He turned them over like a coin he no longer wished to keep. Martha came quietly into the room, drying her hands on her apron. "You didn't eat lunch," she said softly. "I wasn't hungry. You said that yesterday." She hesitated when she saw the locket. "It's hers, isn't it?" He nodded. "Thomas brought it. He said she never changed her name." Martha pursed her lips. "I suppose it doesn't change who she was here." "No," Ethan said, "but it changes who I thought she was." The words hung in the air, sharp and honest. Martha took a breath. "You want me to put it away?" He shook his head. "No, I'll keep it for now. Sometimes holding the truth is easier than putting it down." She nodded once, then turned to go. Before leaving, she paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth, I think she did love you. Maybe not the way you wanted, but in her own broken way." He didn't answer. She left him to the silence. Ethan stared out at the rain again. In the reflection on the glass, he saw himself as 2 men, the one who believed and the one who finally knew. That evening, Thomas returned. The front steps creaked as he climbed, his boots muddy from the road. He took off his hat at the door. "Sorry to come twice in one day," he said. "But there's something you ought to see." He held out a small folder, its edges damp. Inside were photocopies of police reports, bank transactions, and a handwritten note in Vanessa's looping script. Ethan skimmed the words. "If anything happens to me, tell Ethan I only kept the truth from him because I was afraid he'd stop loving me if he knew." He swallowed hard. "Afraid of what?" Thomas hesitated. "There's a trust fund in her name, Moore, not Caldwell. It was set up years ago before she met you. Looks like she was sending money to someone in Little Rock every month." "Who?" "A woman named Carla Moore. Sister, maybe." Ethan leaned back against the table. "So all that time, the trips, the excuses, it wasn't an affair." "No," Thomas said quietly. "But it wasn't honesty either." They stood in the hush of the room. The clock ticked. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked as if the house itself were shifting under the weight of new truth. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Did she break any laws?" "Not by the book," Thomas said. "Just hearts." That earned a faint, sad smile from Ethan. "The worst kind of crime." Thomas nodded. "The kind that never makes it to trial." Ethan looked down at the locket again. His reflection doubled in the gold. V.M. Vanessa Moore. She kept part of herself locked away. Maybe I did too. "Maybe," Thomas said. "But you're the one holding the key now." They shook hands at the door. When Thomas left, the night had already fallen. The sky was deep blue, threaded with lightning in the distance. The air smelled like wet pine and regret. Ethan stood alone in the entryway. He could hear Lila upstairs humming softly a lullaby Anna used to sing. For a moment, it steadied him. He went to the fireplace, stirred the dying embers, and watched them flare back to life. The letter from his father still lay on the mantel. He unfolded it again, reading the same line he had read that morning. "Carry the truth anyway." He whispered, "I'm trying, Dad." "MD?" Then he placed the locket beside the letter, 2 small relics of different loves, each teaching him something about the same word, forgiveness. Later that night, when the rain stopped entirely, Ethan went outside. The air was cool. the kind that smelled of earth after confession. The moon hung low over the lake, pale and merciful. He walked down to the dock, lantern in hand, and lit it once more. The flame caught, trembling against the wind before steadying. He held the locket up toward the light, the gold glinting softly. "You lied," he said, almost kindly. "But maybe that's not the whole story. Maybe you were just too afraid to tell the truth before you learned how to be loved." The words floated out across the water, where they would disappear without echo. He opened the locket. Inside was a photo Lila, smiling, hair wild in the wind. On the other side, a scrap of paper folded small. He opened it. A single line, faded with age. "Even broken things reflect light." Ethan stood very still. He closed the locket and whispered to the night, "So do we. M." Then he set it down beside the lantern. The two small lights, the flame, and the reflection glowed together on the dark water like twin truths, finally at peace. Morning came slow, pale light, seeping through the curtains. The air smelled of wet wood and coffee. Ethan sat by the kitchen table, the same cup from last night still half full. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Derek's face on that video, mocking, calm, certain. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Upstairs, Lila's soft singing drifted down the hallway, a sound that usually warmed him but now carried a tremor of fragility. He rose, buttoned his shirt, and looked out across Beaver Lake. Mist hovered low over the water. Somewhere out there, beyond the fog, the sheriff's cruiser would be heading their way. Thomas had called at dawn. Derek was in custody again. Vanessa was still missing. When the knock finally came, Ethan opened the door to find Sheriff Mills and Thomas Avery standing on the porch. Mills was a broad man in his 60s, his hat dripping with morning rain. Thomas carried his worn leather briefcase, his expression measured. "Morning, Ethan," the sheriff said. "Heard you had one hell of a night." Ethan stepped aside. "Come in. Coffee's fresh." They settled in the study, papers still scattered from the night before. The sheriff took a slow look around. "We picked up Vanessa Caldwell's car at the gas station off Route 9. Empty tank. No sign of her. You've got any idea where she might go?" Ethan shook his head. "If I did, I'd have called you first." Thomas slid a file across the table. "I've gone through the copies you made. Derek's been funneling money out of the company since 2018. Vanessa signed as witness on every transfer." The sheriff whistled low. "That's a whole lot of betrayal for one family." Ethan's eyes hardened. "You don't know the half of it." Lila peeked through the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Mills's voice softened. "She shouldn't be here for this, Ethan." Ethan nodded. "Martha's taking her to my sister's this afternoon." After they left, Ethan walked down to the lake. The rain had stopped, but drops still fell from the trees in slow rhythm. He stood there, breathing in the clean air, feeling both hollow and awake. When he turned back, he saw Lila standing in the doorway. "You promised we'd go to the farmer's fair today," she said quietly. He knelt beside her. "I remember. Maybe just for a little while, okay?" They drove the old pickup into town. The fair was smaller than usual, just a few stands, the smell of cinnamon bread, and children chasing bubbles through the drizzle. For a brief moment, Ethan felt almost normal again. He bought her a caramel apple, watched her laugh as she tried to keep the sticky sweetness from her hair. A woman at one of the stalls called out, "You've got a lovely daughter." Hess smiled. "Thank you." But as they walked back to the truck, he saw a figure across the street, a man in a dark coat, watching. His heart clenched. Derek couldn't be here. Derek was in custody. Still, the resemblance made the air colder. When he blinked, the man was gone. Back home, the clouds broke open again, gentle rain sweeping across the lake. Ethan carried Lila inside, tucking her under a blanket on the couch. "Daddy?" she murmured. "Are we safe now?" He brushed her hair back. "Yes, baby. We're safe." But when he looked out the window, past the soft reflection of the room, he could swear he saw footprints in the mud leading down toward the dock, fresh ones. He went outside, heart pounding. The air was sharp with rain and pine. The prints stopped at the edge of the lake. In the water, something glinted, a silver locket. He picked it up. Inside was a tiny photo of Lila. The initials on the back were engraved clear as breath. V.M. Vanessa Moore. He closed his fist around the locket and stared across the water. For the first time, he wasn't sure if the rain had revealed mercy or a warning. The rain lingered through the afternoon, thin veils drifting across the lake. Ethan stayed by the dock, the locket heavy in his palm. He turned it over again and again, as if the silver could give him answers. The initials felt carved not just into the metal, but into everything he thought he knew about his life. Behind him, the crunch of gravel made him turn. Thomas Avery approached, his overcoat soaked dark at the shoulders, a file tucked beneath his arm. "I thought I'd find you here," he said. Ethan didn't look up. "She left this." Thomas took the locket, squinting at the engraving. "Vanessa Moore. She never signed Caldwell on any legal documents, did she?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "She kept her name, even when she promised she'd change it." "That tells you something," Thomas replied. "She always meant to keep her distance." Ethan looked out at the gray water. "She could have run anywhere. But why leave this behind?" "Maybe she didn't mean to," Thomas said. "Or maybe she wanted you to find it." They walked back toward the house. Inside, the fire had burned low, the smell of wet ash filling the room. Martha had taken Lila to Ethan's sister's as planned. For the first time in years, the house was empty of voices. Thomas placed the file on the table and opened it. "These are your father's estate papers. There's something you should see." Ethan frowned. "I've read them before." "Not this version." Thomas slid a yellowed envelope toward him. "Your father made a second will, never filed. It was sent to me this morning by the county clerk after Derek's arrest." Ethan opened the envelope with careful fingers. The letter was short, written in his father's blunt handwriting. "If either of my sons forgets what this house was built on honesty, not pride, then may the land return to the one who remembers." Below, a single amendment. "Guardianship of the Caldwell estate shall pass to my granddaughter Lila under the care of her father, until such a time as she is old enough to choose her own truth." Ethan's throat tightened. He left it to her. Thomas nodded. He knew Derek would come for it. That's why he wrote it this way. For a long time, Ethan said nothing. The rain tapped against the windows, soft as breathing. "He tried to teach me to be like him," Ethan said finally. "Hard. Unforgiving. I spent my whole life trying not to be. But maybe he wasn't wrong about everything." Thomas smiled faintly. "He wasn't asking you to be hard. He was asking you to protect what mattered." They sat in silence until the fire flickered out. When Thomas stood to leave, he said, "You'll need to decide what comes next. The sheriff's filing charges against Derek tomorrow. They'll want your statement." Ethan nodded. "I'll give it." After Thomas left, the house felt enormous again, its emptiness pressing in from every wall. Ethan walked to Lila's room and stood by her drawings pinned to the wall. Sunsets, trees, the lake, and always three figures. He ran his hand over one picture, realizing the faceless figure in gray that she'd drawn days ago wasn't Derek at all. It was him. He whispered into the quiet, "I see it now, sweetheart. I see it." Outside, the rain slowed to a mist. He stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking beneath his bare feet. Across the water, faint lights glimmered from the other shore. Somewhere out there, Vanessa might still be running. He unclasped the locket and dropped it into the lake. It sank without a ripple. "Let her keep her ghosts," he said softly. "Ours are done." The clouds began to part, a pale slice of sunlight falling across the dock. He breathed in, deep and steady, and for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. From the road above, an engine hummed a familiar sound. He turned to see a small school bus stopping at the gate. Lila stepped down, her backpack slung too big over her shoulders. She spotted him, waved, and ran down the path. He knelt, catching her in his arms. "You're home early." "The rain stopped," she said, beaming. "Aunt May said the fair's still open tonight." He smiled, holding her close. "Then we'll go. Just you and me." As they walked inside, she looked up. "Daddy? Will Mom come back?" He paused, choosing his words. "Maybe one day she'll want to see the truth for herself. But we'll be okay either way. Because we have us? Because we have us," he echoed. They sat together by the window as evening settled. The lake caught the last orange light of the day, and for once, the reflection in the glass wasn't divided anymore. It was whole. Ethan touched her small hand and whispered, "What the rain revealed wasn't her. It was me." Outside, a single bird crossed the fading sky, heading toward the clearing clouds, its wings steady, its path sure. The morning broke soft and pale, the kind of light that felt like an apology after too many gray days. Mist drifted over the lake, wrapping the house in a quiet that felt almost merciful. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, a stack of unopened letters beside his coffee cup. They had been there for weeks, some from the bank, others from people who used to matter. But one envelope stood apart. Cream-colored, thin, written in the delicate hand he knew too well. Vanessa. He turned it over. No return address. Just his name. Simple and neat. Ethan Caldwell. He didn't open it right away. He sat there, tracing the edge of the paper, feeling the weight of what might be inside. From the living room came the sound of small feet padding across the floor. Lila appeared, wrapped in her quilt, hair tangled from sleep. "Daddy, you're up early," he smiled. "Couldn't sleep. Bad dreams?" "No," he said quietly. "Just old ones." She climbed onto the chair beside him, resting her chin on the table. "You still miss Mom Anna, don't you?" "Every day." "And Mom Vanessa?" she asked carefully. Ethan hesitated, choosing his words. "I miss the parts of her that were good. The parts that tried." Lila nodded, as if she understood more than her years allowed. "I think people can be two things at once, good and not so good." He looked at her, surprised. "That's a wise thing to say. You told me once," she said with a shy smile. "Remember? You said even bad days can have good mornings." He reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "You remember everything, don't you? Only the important stuff." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon. Martha must have started baking early. Lila's eyes flicked to the envelope. "Is that from her?" "Yes. Are you going to read it?" "Not yet." "Why?" "Because sometimes," Ethan said softly, "you need to be ready to forgive before you open the words that ask for it." Lila tilted her head. "Do you think she's sorry?" He took a deep breath. "I think she was scared. And scared people do sorry things." She nodded again, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad you're not scared anymore." He smiled faintly. "Me too." The front door creaked open. Martha's voice called out from the hall, warm and familiar. "Morning, both of you. Fresh bread in 20 minutes. "Thanks, Martha," Lila shouted back, grinning. Ethan watched her run to the window to trace shapes in the condensation. The light caught her curls, making them glow like gold threads. He turned the envelope over one more time and finally tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully. "Ethan, if this reaches you, it means I finally found the courage to say what I never could. I was wrong, not for keeping secrets, but for thinking I was protecting you by doing so. I see that now. If I ever made you doubt love, I'm sorry. It wasn't love that failed, it was me. V." He read it twice, then folded it back, pressing it against his palm. It felt almost warm, as if the paper itself carried breath. Outside, the mist began to lift. The lake shimmered faintly, and somewhere far off, a train horn sounded steady, familiar, alive. He whispered to the empty room, "Maybe forgiveness isn't something you give. Maybe it's something you grow into." By late afternoon, the mist had lifted, and the lake shone like a sheet of old glass, the kind that still caught light even through its scratches. Ethan stood on the porch, the letter from Vanessa folded neatly in his hand. The paper was thin, almost transparent when the sun hit it, a fragile thing holding heavy words. He read it again, slowly this time, as though hearing her voice between the lines. "If I ever made you doubt love, I'm sorry. It wasn't love that failed, it was me." The breeze carried the faint scent of wet pine and the echo of distant laughter. Down by the dock, Lila sat cross-legged with her sketchbook, drawing something intently. Every so often, she looked up, squinting toward the light on the water. He walked down to her, careful not to startle the moment. "What are you drawing today?" She grinned. "The lantern. It's brighter today. Look." He crouched beside her. On the page, she had drawn the lake, the dock, the small flame glowing against the gray-blue surface. Above it, a single line read, "Even broken things reflect light." He stared at it. "Where did you hear that?" "I found it in the drawer," she said, pointing toward the old study window. It was on a tiny paper, like something from a fortune cookie. He smiled faintly. "It wasn't a fortune, sweetheart. It was a reminder. She tilted her head. From Mom Vanessa? Yes. Oh? Lila's expression softened. Do you think she meant it? I think she wanted to, he said. Sometimes wanting to be better is the best start someone can give. They sat in silence for a while, the sunlight glittering off the water. A heron crossed the far end of the lake, its reflection trailing like ink. Ethan thought of the years he had wasted trying to carry everything alone, the guilt, the love, the truth, and how small those things seemed beside the gentle persistence of the world continuing anyway. He looked at his daughter. Do you remember what we said about forgiveness? She nodded. That it doesn't mean forgetting. That's right, he said quietly. It means remembering without hating. She closed her sketchbook. Then maybe you can tell her that next time you write back. He smiled, surprised by the simplicity of her faith. Maybe I will. The wind picked up, rippling through the trees, and the lantern's flame flickered. Lila frowned. It's going out. Ethan shook his head. No, it's just breathing. They watched it steady again. The reflection on the water stretched into a golden line that reached all the way to where they Saturday. Lila leaned her head against his arm. Do you think Mom Anna can see it too? I think she sees everything we learn, he said, and she's proud of us for learning slower than we'd like, but never too late. The moment lingered between them, gentle, wordless, whole. The kind of peace that doesn't erase pain but gives it a place to rest. When they went back inside, the house felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but balanced, as if every sound, every memory, had finally found its place again. Ethan placed the letter in a small wooden box on the mantel. Beside it was his father's note, folded the same way. 2 voices from the past, each teaching him something about what it means to stay. He whispered to the quiet room. You were both right. The truth may hurt, but it's the only thing that heals. Outside, the lantern burned steady through the evening. And though night would come soon, it no longer felt like something to fear. The storm had passed, leaving the air washed and still. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen window, catching the dust like small floating stars. Ethan sat at the table, pen in hand, a half-written letter before him. For hours, he had tried to find the right words. None came easily. The truth never did. On the counter behind him, Martha arranged fresh flowers into a glass jar. You've been sitting there since breakfast, she said gently. I'm writing something that took me years to start, he answered without looking up. She didn't press further. Martha had learned that silence could sometimes be kinder than advice. She placed the jar near him. Then let the flowers keep you company. When she left, the house fell quiet again. He read the words he had written, I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because Lila deserves a father who isn't chained to the past. And he paused, then added softly under his breath, and because I can't keep hating someone who once tried to love. The pen trembled slightly in his hand. He folded the letter and sealed it, his heartbeat steady for the first time in months. From the porch came the sound of laughter. Lila's bright and unguarded. Ethan followed the sound outside. The afternoon light lay gentle across the yard. Lila was chasing a butterfly near the dock, her hair catching the sun like a halo. He called out, Careful, sweetheart, don't fall in. She turned, smiling. You say that every time, and every time, I mean it. When she ran up to him, she slipped her small hand into his. Daddy, are you happy today? He thought for a moment. I think I'm learning how to be. They stood there together. The world simple for a moment, the smell of wet earth, the hum of crickets, the soft glow on the lake. Later, when Lila went inside, Ethan lingered. The light on the water shimmered, calm and sure. He remembered his father's voice from a long-ago fishing trip. The hardest part about truth isn't finding it. It's deciding what to do once you have it. He whispered, I know now, Dad. He took the letter back inside, placed it on the mantel beside the old locket and his father's note. All 3 pieces of his life, pain, forgiveness, and memory, finally rested in the same place. As the sun began to set, the light turned amber and soft. Ethan whispered to the empty room, The truth feels lighter tonight. And for the first time, it truly was. The afternoon sun hung low, turning the lake into a sheet of trembling gold. Inside the Caldwell house, everything was still. No storms, no arguments, no footsteps pacing the hall. Just the soft ticking of the clock, steady as a heartbeat. learning to trust itself again. Ethan stood by the living room window, the letter he had written still resting on the desk beside him. He had crossed out 3 lines, rewritten 2, and finally stopped trying to make the words perfect. Sometimes truth didn't need perfection, it only needed peace. The letter was short. I forgive you, not because you asked, but because Lila deserves a father who isn't chained to the past. Wherever you are, I hope you find light. He folded it, sealed it, and left it on the table. Tomorrow he would mail it. Tonight, he needed to live through its meaning. From the kitchen came the faint clatter of plates. Martha's voice drifted in, warm as ever. Dinner's ready, sir. Thank you, he called back. Lila appeared in the doorway, her hair tied up with one of Martha's old ribbons, a streak of flour on her cheek. We made chicken and biscuits. That sounds dangerous, he said with a smile. Why? Because I might eat all of it. She giggled and tugged his hand toward the table. Then you better hurry. They ate on the porch as the light faded. The air was soft and cool, carrying the smell of pine and rain-soaked earth. Lila talked about her art class, her favorite teacher, a stray kitten she wanted to adopt. Ethan listened, really listened, without drifting into the quiet spaces of regret where he used to live. At one point, she looked at him seriously. Daddy, are you still mad at Mom Vanessa? He set down his fork. No, sweetheart, I'm not mad anymore. You forgive her? Yes, he said after a moment. Because I finally understand that forgiving someone doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means you decide not to let the hurt win. Lila thought about that, then nodded. That's hard. It is, he said softly. But you get stronger each time you try. After dinner, they brought out cookies Martha had baked earlier. They laughed when Lila spilled milk on the porch rail and called it an offering to the ants. Later, after she went inside to wash up, Ethan stayed behind. The sun was gone, but the last light lingered a fading glow that painted everything in shades of amber and peace. He looked across the lake. The lantern still burned on the dock, steady and small. For the first time, it didn't feel like a memorial. It felt like a promise kept. He took a slow breath and whispered toward the water. You were wrong, Vanessa. Truth doesn't destroy people, it frees them. The words drifted into the still air and seemed to stay there, hanging between the trees and the fading light. Inside, the house glowed warm, alive. Lila's laughter rang from upstairs. She was playing with Martha's old radio again, the one that never quite tuned perfectly but still found the soft hum of distant stations. Ethan went upstairs a little later and found her curled on the couch, half asleep under a blanket, the radio whispering an old tune from decades ago. He turned the volume down and sat beside her. Daddy? She murmured without opening her eyes. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Mom Vanessa can hear us? He smiled faintly. I think she hears what matters. Then tell her I'm not scared anymore. I think she already knows. Lila drifted into sleep, her hand still clutching the corner of his shirt. Ethan brushed her hair gently from her forehead. He sat there a long time, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, feeling the strange, quiet grace that came when life stopped, demanding answers, and started teaching acceptance. Downstairs, the wind stirred the curtains. The scent of baked bread lingered. The house felt whole again, not perfect, not healed, but honest. When the clock chimed 9, he rose and walked outside. The air had cooled, but not cold enough to chase him back in. Fireflies blinked across the yard, tiny floating stars that didn't need the sky to shine. He walked down to the dock and sat on the edge, his feet brushing the water. The lantern flickered beside him. Its light danced on the surface, bending, reforming, never breaking. He took a small object from his pocket, the old key that once locked his father's safe. For years he had kept it without knowing why. He turned it in his hand, feeling the grooves warm against his skin. Then, without ceremony, he tossed it into the water. The splash was small, but the sound carried far, echoing back like a release. Goodbye, he whispered, not to anyone, but to everything that no longer needed to stay. He looked at his reflection. For the first time, he saw not a man divided by guilt and memory, but one made whole by the very things that had once broken him. Behind him, Martha stepped quietly onto the porch. You're out here again, she said. Couldn't sleep. She nodded. Some nights aren't for sleeping. They're for remembering right. He smiled. You're wiser than you pretend. "I've had practice," she said, then added gently. "She'd be proud of you, you know." He turned toward the lake again. "Maybe. But I think tonight's about being proud of her, too." Martha stayed for a moment longer, then left him to the peace he'd earned. The lantern's flame fluttered once, then steadied again. In its glow, Ethan could see everything: the house, the trees, the faint reflection of the stars returning. He whispered into the quiet, "The weight of truth doesn't crush you when you share it with love. It becomes the light you live by." He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the night hold him no longer heavy, no longer afraid. The letter had been mailed 3 days earlier. No return address, no expectation. Yet that morning, as Ethan opened the mailbox, a white envelope lay among the bills. The handwriting was familiar, neat but faint, as if written with shaking hands. He carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for a long while. The sound of rain against the window seemed to hush the house. Lila was at school, Martha at the market. For the first time in weeks, Ethan was alone again. He made coffee, sat down, and broke the seal. "Ethan, you were right. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I don't want to leave this world without trying to make peace with the one person who showed me kindness when I had none left to give. I'm in St. Vincent's Hospital in Fayetteville. I don't expect you to come, but if you can find it in your heart to look me in the eye once more, I'll understand everything you meant by love. Vanessa." He set the letter down. Outside, the rain deepened. He thought of ignoring it. He had every reason to, but something inside him stirred. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe it was the same stubborn hope that had once made him believe she could change. By afternoon, he was on the road. The hospital sat on a hill above town, the same red brick building where his daughter had been born. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and flowers. He asked for room 312. The nurse nodded, eyes soft, as if she knew the story already. When he entered, the light in the room was pale and cold. Vanessa lay against the pillows, thinner than he remembered, her face shadowed but calm. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled weakly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," he said. "I wouldn't have blamed you." He pulled a chair closer. "What happened?" "Car accident," she said quietly. 2 nights ago. Nothing dramatic. Just rain, bad timing. Maybe God's way of stopping me long enough to listen." He said nothing. She turned her head toward the window. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were the safest place in the world. I mistook quiet for peace. But peace isn't silence, is it?" "No," Ethan said softly. "It's truth. And truth can be loud." A faint laugh escaped her. "You always were better with words." They sat in the quiet hum of machines. Rain streaked the window, thin silver lines against gray. "I read your letter," she whispered finally. "You said you forgave me." Ember Frayne. "I meant it." "Why?" He thought for a moment. "Because Lila deserves a father who isn't chained to the past. And because you deserve to know that hate isn't what defines you in the end." Her eyes shimmered. I didn't think you'd still believe in grace." "I stopped believing in perfection," he said. "But grace, maybe it's just love that's learned how to live with the truth." For the first time, Vanessa smiled without the mask she always wore. "Tell Lila I'm sorry." "I will," he said, "and I'll tell her you tried." She reached for his hand. Her grip was faint but steady. "Do you think people like us ever get another chance?" He squeezed her fingers gently. "We already got one. We just didn't see it." A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the light. When the nurse came in to check her vitals, Ethan stood. "I'll come back tomorrow." Vanessa's voice was barely a whisper. "You always said that before. Maybe this time mean it." He nodded. "I do. Ugh." Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing thin threads of sunlight. He stood beneath the awning for a long moment, breathing in the scent of wet earth and cut grass. He didn't know if Vanessa would make it through the night, but as he looked toward the horizon, where the hospital's reflection shimmered in a puddle, he felt something shift, a quiet release. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't regret. It was peace. Night was falling by the time Ethan left St. Vincent's. The rain had thinned to a mist, blurring the edges of the world. Streetlights glowed like halos through the fog. and the sound of tires on wet pavement hummed like an old lullaby. He drove without turning on the radio, letting silence fill the car. His hands stayed steady on the wheel, though his heart felt oddly weightless. The hospital, the machines, Vanessa's trembling voice, all of it seemed both close and impossibly far away, as if it belonged to someone else's story. When he reached the turnoff toward Beaver Lake, the clouds had split open. The moon rose pale over the water, and the reflection of it shimmered across the windshield like a path home. Inside the house, Martha had already put Lila to bed. A note on the table read, "She fell asleep drawing again. All's well. M." Ethan smiled faintly. He hung his coat, loosened his tie, and walked down the hallway toward his daughter's room. The door was half open. Lila lay curled on her side, a sketchbook still open beside her pillow. He bent down and turned the page carefully. The drawing was of a woman lying in a bed, a window behind her filled with light. The woman was smiling. Underneath, in her uneven handwriting, Lila had written, "Mom said she's sorry." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. "How did you know, sweetheart?" he whispered. Lila stirred, half awake. "I dreamed it," she murmured. "She was by the lake. You were there too." He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Then maybe it wasn't just a dream." She opened her eyes for a moment, sleepy but certain. "Are you sad?" He hesitated. "A little. You can cry if you want. It doesn't make you weak." He smiled, his throat tightening. "Who told you that?" "You did. Once." He leaned down and kissed her cheek. "Then I guess I'll believe it." When she drifted back to sleep, he turned off the lamp and stood watching her for a long moment. The moonlight slipped through the curtains, painting soft silver lines across her blanket, the same kind of light that used to spill across the nursery when she was a baby, when Anna would whisper songs he never learned the words to. He left her room quietly and walked outside. The night was still, the lake smooth as glass again. He could see the faint outline of the hospital lights far across the water, flickering like distant candles. For a moment, he thought of Vanessa, of how fear can make good people cruel, and how guilt can make them human again. He didn't know if she would wake in the morning, but he hoped she would find peace wherever her road ended. Ethan stepped onto the dock. The boards creaked beneath his boots, familiar and forgiving. He carried with him the lantern he had kept burning for days and placed it once more at the edge of the pier. The reflection wavered, two small flames dancing together, the real one and its twin below. He sat there until the stars came out. The air smelled of cedar and wet earth. Somewhere across the lake, a dog barked, then silence returned. In that quiet, his thoughts unfolded like pages. His father's last letter, Derek's bitterness, Vanessa's trembling apology, Anna's memory, Lila's laughter. All of them different voices, yet somehow part of the same song. He whispered to the water, as if the lake could hear. "You were right, Anna. Love isn't something you lose, it's something you learn to carry." A soft wind brushed the surface, bending the reflection of the flame into a thin, golden thread. He watched it flicker and straighten again. Behind him, the screen door creaked. Martha stepped out, wrapped in a shawl. "You're out here again," she said. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. She nodded. "That's all right. Some nights aren't for sleeping. Em?" They stood side by side, gazing at the water. After a while, she said, "You know, your father used to do the same thing. Sit right there, waiting for the morning to come. He said it helped him remember who he was before the world told him who he should be." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what I'm doing too." When she went back inside, he stayed. Hours passed gently. The lantern burned lower, but he didn't refill it. He wanted to see what it looked like when the flame finally died, not as an ending, but as a way of knowing the dark wasn't something to fear anymore. As the last spark faded, dawn began to rise behind him, painting the lake in soft peach light. Mist rolled low over the surface, and somewhere deep in the trees, a bird began to sing. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The air was cool, full of promise. The heaviness he'd carried for years, the shame, the guilt, the noise of unfinished stories had thinned into something lighter. He whispered, almost smiling. That's what the last visit was for. He turned toward the house. Through the kitchen window, he could see the first movements of the day. Lila padding sleepily into the hallway. Martha opening the curtains, the sun spilling across the floorboards like mercy. He thought of all the visits that had shaped him, the last conversation with his father, the last night with Anna, the last argument with Derek, the last promise to Vanessa, and how each one had left something behind. A truth, a scar, a lesson, a light. Maybe that was the meaning of redemption. It wasn't erasing what happened, but transforming how it lived inside you. He opened the door, the warmth of the house, meeting the chill of morning. Lila ran into his arms, her hair still tangled from sleep. "Daddy, it's morning," she said, smiling. "It is," he said softly. "And we made it." She looked up at him. "You look different." "Do I?" "Yeah, you look light." He laughed quietly, lifting her into his arms. "Then I guess the evidence is showing." They walked to the porch together, the lake glowing behind them. For a moment, time slowed, the kind of stillness that holds everything you've lost and everything you've found, all in the same breath. He looked out at the horizon one last time and whispered, not as a prayer, but as truth. Redemption doesn't erase what happened. It transforms how we remember it. The light touched the water, bright and endless, and for the first time since he could remember, Ethan Caldwell felt completely alive. Sometimes, when the house grows quiet and the air turns soft before dusk, we remember stories like this one not for their noise, but for the stillness they leave behind. Ethan's story began in the echo of loss and ended in the hush of forgiveness. From broken promises to quiet redemption, he learned that love doesn't vanish when life gets messy. It simply changes its shape, waiting for us to see it again. In the end, it wasn't wealth or pride that saved him, but small things. A child's laughter drifting down the hallway, the warmth of bread cooling on the counter, the faint glow of a lantern left burning by the lake. Those simple, ordinary lights became the map that guided him back home. Maybe that's how healing works. It arrives in whispers, in gentle mornings when the coffee tastes familiar again, in moments when we finally say someone's name without pain. It's not about erasing what happened. It's about learning to live with love that survived it all. The truth is, kindness doesn't have to be grand to change a life. Sometimes it's just a seat left open at the dinner table, a hand offered in silence, or a letter written not to be answered but to be understood. Like the porch light left on for a loved one coming home late, even the smallest act of care can cut through the darkest night. And maybe that's the lesson hidden in the last visit. Love asks for patience, redemption asks for courage, and family, no matter how fractured, asks only that we keep showing up. Because happiness isn't found in having everything. It's found in choosing to stay, to forgive, and to believe again. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about it. Maybe there's someone in your life who needs to know that forgiveness is still possible, that they still have a place at your table. And if you felt something tonight, if Ethan's journey reminded you of your own, press 1 inch the comments to let us know. If you think it could be better, or if there's a lesson we missed, press 0 and tell us your thoughts. Your voice helps us keep these stories alive, one heart at a time. Before we go, remember this. Just like the lantern by Ethan's lake, a single act of quiet kindness can still light the way home.